So animals are multicellular. Their bodies contain different types of cells that have different functions. And when you have multiple cells working together as a unit, that's called the tissue. And what you see is that in most animals have embryonic tissues, like the ones that we've been going over in lab when we looked over the phylum characteristics, the endoderm, ectoderm, and mesoderm. Most animals have those three germ layers. And those three germ layers give rise to four tissue types in adult animals. So we have the nervous tissue, the muscle tissue, epithelial tissue, and connective tissue. Okay. So the connective tissue, you can see that there's many types. So we have like the loose connective tissue where the extracellular matrix is more jelly-like. Okay, this is mainly used or mainly found in parts of the body that require, you know, padding or also to hold tissues together, okay, loosely. So like loose areolar connective tissue that you looked at in lab. Or it can also be dense connective tissue, okay, where you have more collagen fibers and fibroblasts, cell nuclei. So so these would have more of a softer extracellular matrix. So if you remember from lab, the tissue is made up of two components. There's a living component, which are the cells, and then there's the non-living component, the the, s- the extracellular matrix. So for these first two connective tissues, that extracellular matrix is going to be softer. Okay? Whereas there's also for supporting tissues or supporting connective tissue like bone and cartilage, you see that the extracellular matrix is solid, okay, or it's just sturdy or harder, like in cartilage and bone. So in bone, it's obviously solid. Okay, you can see it here. The cells are those small dark dots, and the osteon that we went over are these. It's a whole unit. Okay, but the cells are the small dots. Okay, then we have the chondrocytes, like in hyaline cartilage, connective tissue. Okay, and then blood is also a connective tissue, and here the extracellular matrix is fluid because plasma is mainly fluid. Okay, so you can see the red blood cells here, the smaller red or reddish circles, and then you can see also some leukocytes, some white blood cells. So nervous tissue is made of nerve cells that are called neurons, and these have several types of supporting cells. Okay, so the neurons transmit electrical signals uh, that are made by changes in permeability of the cell's plasma membrane to ions or action potentials. Most neurons have two distinct types of projections. So they have the short dendrites, which transmit electrical signals from adjacent uh, neurons or neuron cell bodies. And then you have the long axons, which carry the signals from the cell body to other cells. Okay, so here you can see the cell body or the soma, the long axons here, and the shorter dendrites. Muscle tissue was a key innovation in the evolution of animals, and both muscle and nervous tissue appear in no other lineage in the tree of life. So the main functions include movement of the body, right, for skeletal muscle or pumping of the heart, for cardiac muscle, and mixing of food in your gastrointestinal tract, like the smooth muscle. So the three types, okay, are the ones that we went over in lab. And we also went over the distinguishing characteristics of the three types of muscle, right? So skeletal muscle is striated, and you can see that the nuclei of those muscle fibers are on the periphery. Okay. And here the movement is voluntary, right? It's involved in voluntary movement, like when you flex your muscles. Cardiac muscle is involuntary. It's also striated, but here the nuclei are not on the periphery of those muscle fibers. And you can also see those intercalated discs on the fibers. There's also just more branching of the cardiac muscle, okay, because it has to send those, it has to be able, it has to send those signals to contract to have contractions throughout the heart. So it's a lot more branched. Those fibers are more branched compared to the skeletal muscle. And then for smooth muscle, the nuclei are also not on the periphery, so they're within the muscle fibers, and you don't see any striations on these. So these are also involved in involuntary movement. So skeletal muscle is the one that attaches to the bones and it exerts force when it contracts. Okay? Cardiac muscle makes up the walls of the heart, and the job is to pump blood throughout the body. Then we have the smooth muscle, and this lines the walls of the digestive tract and also blood vessels. So it controls the movement throughout those systems. Epithelial tissues, or epithelia, which is just plural for epithelial tissues, are tissues that cover the outside of your body and lines the surfaces of organs and forms some of the glands. So an organ is a structure that's specialized for a specific function and it has several types of tissues. A gland is just a group of cells that secrete specific molecules or solutions. So like hormones or enzymes. Then um, we can also see that the epithelia is divided into two major types. There's simple epithelia, which is made up of a single layer of cells, and this allows for gases, nutrients, and other substances to move across easily through things like diffusion. Then we have stratified epithelia, and this is where the layers are closely packed and you see multiple layers of cells. And these are mainly to protect the body from the environment. So stratified epithelia would be like the stratified squamous epithelia that you saw in lab. So these are mainly for protection. So these are in areas where you lose a lot of, there's areas where that take a lot of damage. So it could be like um, like the lining of your mouth, uh, places like that. Okay, so the tissues the tissues throughout your body, they have two sides to them. There's the apical side, which would be the side that faces inward, and then there's the basolateral side, the side that faces um, other tissue types. Okay? The apical side is usually the side that has more wear and tear, or where the cells don't live as long. So, for example, like this stratified squamous epithelium here, you can see the apical side on this side. This is the basolateral side that's connected to other tissue types. Okay. Here, there's a line called the basal lamina that divides them. So these epithelial cells are this is the apical side, and this is the part where the cells are just constantly being worn out, so they have to be replaced. Connective tissue is made up of cells that are loosely arranged, and as we went over before, it can either be jelly, liquid, or solid. It could be a solid matrix. And the matrix comprises extracellular fibers, or is comprised of extracellular fibers and other materials. And the different fiber types are collagen, reticular, and elastin. So the matrix is secreted by the connective tissue cells themselves. And the nature of the matrix determines the nature of the connective tissue. So the four types of connective tissue, there's loose connective tissue. This contains an array of fibrous proteins and a soft matrix. And you can see that with things like adipose tissue and fat tissue. Then there's the dense connective tissue that contains the matrix that has a lot of collagen fibers, which are secreted by fibroblasts. Okay. So when you see the word blast, that just means that it's an active cell that's still um, it's still producing. If it says site, that means that it's no longer active. So for the dense connective tissue, the examples would be like the tendons and ligaments that connect bones and muscles. Then there's a supporting connective tissue that has a firm extracellular matrix, right, like bone and cartilage, and the fluid connective tissue, which is surrounded by a liquid extracellular matrix, like blood. Okay, so cells with similar functions are organized into tissues, and those tissues are organized into organs. Okay, and then the organs make up organ systems. So these consist of groups of tissues and organs that work together to perform one or more functions. So, for example, the small intestine is made up of the four types of tissue: muscle, nervous, connective, and epithelial tissue. So here you can see how the tissues are organized into into organs. So you can see here, this is a diagram of a piece of the small intestine. So you can see the different tissue types. And you guys experienced this when you were looking at your slides, that even if a slide was labeled a certain tissue, you would be able to see, in most cases, different types of tissue on that one slide. So on the right, you can see a diagram that's showing you the digestive system. So it's showing you how the different organs work together to accomplish a function. So like in the digestive system, digestion begins up here in the mouth where the salivary glands secrete the enzymes to begin digestion, right? Then the food gets pushed down through the esophagus. It makes its way to the stomach where it's broken down, right, with things like hydrochloric acid. And also just the contractions of the stomach are breaking the food down. The absorption takes place in the small intestine. And then you have things like the liver and the pancreas, which secrete enzymes, okay, to aid in digestion. And then after the small intestine, you have the large intestine where mainly just the water is reabsorbed, okay, and the food is compressed or compacted. Okay, so that will be it for part 2. So we'll continue part 3 on the next video.